An estimated 500 Warrior Met miners and supporters rallied at the New York City headquarters of BlackRock, the company's biggest investor, yesterday.
Are you sick of it? Yeah! Are you sick of CEOs dictating your lives where you live and where you work? Say hell yeah!
1,000 miners have been on strike since April 1st, demanding better pay and benefits.
But not just you. They stole it from They stole it to the mom and pop shops that we're supposed to be supporting. Now, I'm a patriotic American. And I think that we hear things like that all the time.
Joe Biden says he's pro-union, but where is his support for the miners? Joining us now to weigh in is the host of the Katie Halper Show and co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast, Katie Halper. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, we're dealing with, obviously, all of these employees, large protests in New York City. They are protesting. They've been protesting since April 1st. Their company looking for better wages, looking for more time off. Now they're protesting the investor of their company. Joe Biden noticeably absent in all of this. What do you think Joe Biden's role should be?
Well, I think that Biden, he likes to kind of pay lip service to workers and to the labor movement, but he hasn't done very much. And it's interesting because, one would think that he would care about this issue since what does he claim? That his ancestors are miners, coal miners? Mm-hmm. Of course, it turns out that's not exactly true. But maybe when he was protesting getting arrested for Nelson Mandela, he met some of them or something. But in all seriousness, it's not that surprising because he actually has BlackRock people in his administration, which shouldn't be surprising, but it's disturbing. So his White House National Economic Council, Brian Deese, is a BlackRock guy. Sorry, BlackRock. Freudian slip. BlackRock and Wally Adeyemo also. So, there's the usual conflict of interest that we see that is kind of sadly bipartisan and timeless. And, people were very rightly angry with Trump when those were on display. But we have to make sure that we keep our eye on the ball with Biden. Just because he's president doesn't mean all of those conflicts of interest are gone.
What should the administration do? Is it about? I'm sorry to talk over you, Kim. Should he speak up about this issue, or would you like to actually see action?
Both would be great.
But so he's essentially pro-union, but only when the union is not in conflict with his interests. And it's, I'm pro-union to a point, just got to make sure I got to check my roster.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And he's always, he likes to pretend that he's very in touch with the middle class, right? That he represents the middle class. And of course, it was funny when what did he say? He said that, nothing would fundamentally change. Yeah. Which of course conflicted with his framing the election as between Park Avenue and Scranton. Which you remember when Stephanie Rule freaked out about that? On MSNBC. She's like, I live close to Park Avenue, and I worked my butt off to get there. I was like, can't you let the guy, pander? Come on. He already said nothing would fundamentally change. Calm down.
Right.
Meanwhile, President Biden has proposed changing the way the federal government assess products made in America. He made that announcement yesterday in Pennsylvania. He argued the change would help support domestic industries. Let's take a listen.
Today, I'm directing the Budget Office to issue a rule to raise the amount of domestic content required to be considered made in America from 55% to 75%. Substantially all is going to mean substantially all. And starting with critical products, instead of taking contractors at their word that they've hit the threshold, we're going to start making them give us the details so that we can do more to support American manufacturing.
But this is just about, change what constitutes for the label Made in America, which doesn't seem actually to me like a big thing at all. Am I wrong about that?
No, yeah, I think it's not that substantive, right? It's just a labeling. And even if things are made in America more, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be exploitation. And we see that because people right now are on strike, right?
Right.
So there's obviously no guarantee of fair labor conditions.
Right. This looks like definitely a lot of pandering. I mean, you've got Joe Biden here, who, again, I'm Scranton and I'm all American Joe, good old Uncle Joe, and saying, I'm going to be all for America. I'm going to be pro-American worker. I mean, that's kind of the entire real messaging around Made in America, which is I'm going to be pro-America worker, pro-America, middle class, and the good old boys and in Scranton, but ultimately not then stepping up when you do have all of these workers on the streets. They've been on strike for a long time. And, like you mentioned, he's got BlackRock people in his administration. So who is he really for? I mean, this just looks like, again, it's politics as usual.
Yeah, exactly. Politics as usual. I think that's the big takeaway. And he is very good at, it's funny that he didn't even feel pressure or need to pay lip service to these striking workers. I mean, it's pretty significant.
Do you think there's anything that can be done? I mean, is there anyone, do you think, that could actually put the pressure on Joe Biden to step up and say something on behalf of these miners? Or I guess all hope is lost?
I mean, I think if we as, activists and the left actually tried to, talked about, well, you know what it is? It's like the media doesn't highlight it at all. That's the big thing that we see in all of these stories. From like Assange to Steve Donziger. I know you were speaking to Steve Donziger, and it really is a reminder of how absent and irresponsible the media is, because that's, of course, one of the big things that forces people to respond, that forces the powerful to respond. And if Biden isn't being confronted with this, why would he respond?
Yeah, the media clearly has a preference. I think the media is obviously it is very, in some ways, progressive or captured by liberal, more mainstream liberals who have a very selective focus on issues, and it's often not economic and labor issues. It's often, right now everything has to be filtered through the lens of race and racism, which is not that of course there are genuine racial issues we need to address, but like every issue needs to be, okay, well, what's the race issue so we can actually talk about it? That seems to be the media's approach. And so I think so many labor issues that really don't have that easy framework, and thus you get the media's like total silence on it because it's just not interesting to them.
I wonder, do you think that this is... Yeah. Go ahead, Katie. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to... Oh, sorry. No, the United Mining Workers, UMW, is actually a very integrated... historically, has been a very integrated union. And I think what you said is really important, because it's not just that there isn't a focus on economic issues, but when you do focus on economic issues, and like mining workers shows this a lot, or most, workers' issues, they're about economic issues, but there's, of course, an overlap and an intersection. And all these economic issues are racial justice issues as well, right? So, everything from Medicare for all, which disproportionately benefits people, Black people, people of color, Black seniors, student debt, which is something that Black women deal with disproportionately. So all these issues, the reason that the focus is on the racial justice element, which, as you said, Robbie, is a very important thing to focus on, but it's often done at the expense of, it's often on a symbolic level. And, again, I remember the DNC talking about how COVID disproportionately affects African Americans, but this was also the convention for a president who said he would basically veto Medicare for all if it came to his desk. So the question is always, what are you doing? That's great that you're making these insightful analytical comments about racial justice, but what are the policies? And economic issues are racial justice issues. So,
I think the big question from all of this, actually, in looking at these protests and Joe Biden remaining mum, is how is this going to affect 2024? We saw in 2016, obviously, that with Hillary Clinton losing the Rust Belt, she was in shock about that. And it was because they weren't listening to those workers. They weren't listening to those blue collar people. And instead, they were calling them deplorable. And we see that sort of happening even now when you've got Joe Biden painting, half of America essentially as these racist, essentially calling them deplorable without calling them deplorable, but saying, they're domestic terrorists, or anybody who supported Trump is, a bane on society. And a lot of those people are these very workers who are on strike, and Joe Biden, who is supposed to be all about them, isn't stepping up. I'm wondering if this is going to cause in 2024 a potential repeat of 2016, where some outsider comes in and says, I hear you, because these guys don't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the numbers are in terms of minors, in terms of what their support of Trump versus Biden was, or Trump versus
These
Hillary.
are all
But what
from Alabama, remember? These are Alabama minors.
Yeah, but I mean, there's another thing that there is sometimes like a distortion of how much support. I mean, then there's a whole question of I just actually had William Barber on my show, and there's a whole question of unorganized voter suppressed and unorganized states as opposed to red states. But sorry, I'm getting a little off track. But I do think that we see a dangerous. This is Biden. This is a guy who would love during the 2020 during the primary. He kept telling people not to vote for him, kind of rhetorically. Then don't vote for me, right? Or telling black people, you're going black if you're not voting for Biden. And I do think that there's a dangerous self-righteous, writing off of people. And I actually was really kind of surprised when he made that comment this week about masks, and said, if you're not wearing a mask or don't get vaccinated, you're not as smart as I thought you were, or you're more stupid than I thought you were, which I was just like, why would you frame it that way? Do you think that that's going to actually reach people? Do you think anyone listening to that who's on the fence is going to be like, oh, I guess he's right. I should be smarter. I'm an idiot. Let me go put on a mask.
Yeah.
And then let me vote for Joe Biden in 2024.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Very prescient warning. Thanks so much for being with us today, Katie. We really appreciate it. More Rising right after this.